Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to jUST, Not All. In this session of jUST, Not All, we will be discussing Larry Elder's take on reparations, the lies, the half-truths, and the misleads. All have been debunked. Welcome to jUST, Not All.
For just us, not all.
These kind of boys seems innocent, Boogie. Got everybody on the post thinking he's a strong black buck. White boys envy his strength, his speed, power in his swing. And this colored champion lets those same white boys call him Shine or Sambo.
Whoa, Lord.
And he just smiles.
Dream about the time when I was a little boy.
Mr. Elder received a JD from the University of Michigan and his BA from Brown University.
You dropped 150 grand on a fucking education you could have got for $1.50 in late charges at the public library.
Mr. Elder, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
And as Congresswoman Lee pointed out, Black people are a race of overcomers. And it talks about the fact that despite all the problems that have been brought up in this committee about racism, about slavery, about Jim Crow, Black people have overcome to the point now where only 20% of Black people are below the federally defined level of poverty.
As you can see at this chart by Statista, whites' poverty level are at 7.3%. Asians are at 7.3%. All races are at 10.5%. Hispanics are at 15.7%. And blacks are at the highest at 18.8%, a little lower than 20%. So, as you can see, Black people have the highest poverty rate in America. Shouldn't we have been overcame that?
I also find it ironic we're having this hearing 13 years after we elected and then re-elected the first Black president of the United States. I'm old school. I still get the newspapers thrown to my house. And the day that Obama got elected, I got the New York Times and the LA Times thrown to my home. And on the front pages of both those newspapers, there were colored pictures of Black parents hugging their kids, crying, saying things like, now I can say for the first time truly that if you work hard, you can be anything you want to be.
So my question is, if parents were saying, now I can truly say, if you work hard, you can be anything you want to be. What were they doing before? Lying? Was they giving children false hope?
In 1997, Time Magazine and CNN did a broad survey of Black teens and white teens and asked both of them whether or not racism was a major problem in America. And both of them said yes, not too surprisingly. But then Black teens were asked the following question. Is racism a big problem, a small problem, or no problem in your own daily life? 89% of Black teens in 1997 said racism was a small problem or no problem in my own daily life. In fact, twice as many Black teens as white teens said failure to take advantage of available opportunities is a bigger problem than racism. End of quote.
Now, I was a teenager in 1987. I was about 16 years old. And I didn't experience that much racism unless I went outside my neighborhood. However, I never said words like failure to take advantage of opportunities is a bigger problem to me than racism. That sounds like something somebody said or put in somebody's head to say. That sounds like the reporter just said, is failure opportunity to take care of opportunities is bigger than racism? And somebody said, yeah. Because there's very few opportunities, especially in 1987. We were just coming off the 70s where there was none. So now we had basketball, we had football, we had a few sports, and we had entertainment. But to see CEOs and in 87? Because remember, the movie Strictly Business came out in the 90s? So, no. It just started making moves in the 90s, really. And this should be also said to, let's say, all our racism in New York City, the racial tension with everybody, Yusuf Hawkins. What happened with Yusuf Hawkins? No disrespect to him, but evidently there must have been some misguidance if he goes to Bensonhurst, because there's no racism, and he winds up dead.
My grandson, shut down in all blood.
When 16-year-old Yusuf Hawkins was murdered in a white New York neighborhood called Bensonhurst, racial tensions exploded.
Yesterday showed the open hostility that exists in New York. Yusuf was a victim of racism.
Everybody has used this incident.
And that again was 23 years ago before Obama got elected, let alone reelected. Speaking of Obama, 2007, he ran for presidency. His rival for the Democratic side was Hillary Clinton. And on the Republican side, the two primary rivals were John McCain and Mitt Romney. Gallup asked whether or not Americans would not vote for a black person, referring to Obama, would not vote for a woman, referring to Hillary Clinton, would not vote for a Mormon, referring to Mitt Romney, would not vote for a person as old as John McCain would be, 72 years old. And what Gallup found is 5% of Americans said they would not, under any circumstances, vote for a black person. 11% said they would not, under any circumstances, vote for a female. 24% said they would not vote for a Mormon. 42% said they would not vote for a person who would be 72 years old when he became president, which would have been the case had John McCain been elected. In other words, Obama as a black person had a smaller barrier than these three white politicians. So having this conversation right now when racism has never been a less significant problem in America, to me, is mind-boggling. Right now, Congress is 12% black, which is roughly the percentage of blacks in America.
So as you can see, that entire 5% that was against Obama must have been out there with all those signs. I didn't see no signs for against Mitt Romney. I never saw no real big signs or big protests against John McCain. And it wasn't until Hillary Clinton's second run that there were really big protests that everybody realized how much BS she was. So to say that says a whole bunch of nothing when we have evidence that shows that people were directly against Obama because he was black. So they came up with any excuse. Any excuse. Now, as far as Congress is 12% black, that is roughly the percentage of black people are in America. But guess what? When Donald Trump says unemployment for blacks is at its lowest in history, not one of them clapped. Now, none of them are happy about that. Why is that? Why is none of them happy? They look very disappointed about that. Everybody black thought that Obama was going to be the Messiah and come back and black people was going to be at the lowest unemployment ever. No, it wasn't. But when Trump do it, they're really not happy. Why is that? Because those 12% of blacks in Congress, representing the 12% of blacks that's in America, don't give two rats' asses about the blacks that's in America. We put them in office just so they can screw us over. As you can see here, they can care less. They are not happy about black people working.
And something I'm very proud of, African American unemployment stands at the lowest rate ever recorded.
In 1964, Martin Luther King gave an interview to the BBC. And he said he was surprised at the changes that have taken place in America in recent years. And he believed that a black person could become president in 40 years' time, or maybe even less. That's roughly around the time when Obama became president. And Martin Luther King did not say, We will know when we've arrived at the promised land, when there's a black coach of Notre Dame, which has happened, when there is a black female who's the president of an Ivy League university, which has happened, when blacks are mayors of all the major cities in America, which has happened, when blacks are police chiefs of the major cities in America, when there are superintendents of schools of America or mayors of America, sometimes all three at the same time. He did not say that. He did not say when black people become millionaires and billionaires, which has happened. He did not say when black people become CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. He said when a black person becomes president, that's when we'll know we've reached a point where people are being evaluated based on the content of their character to the extent that it is reasonable to expect.
That's the tossing of a bone. Other countries in the United Nations, they're looking at America's hypocrisy, and they're still hypocrites. And everybody else is saying, wait a minute, you're telling us how to run our country, and look at what you're doing in your country. African Americans get nothing in America, and you make sure of it. So they can toss a bone, so every once in a while they could go, oh, look, we got Jay-Z. Oh, look, we got Beyonce. Oh, look, we got Oprah Winfrey. Oh, look, we got Larry Elder. That's all that is. It's not real. It's fake. It's a bone. Level the playing field and make it tangible. And watch how black people explode and do their thing for real.
And the idea that slavery built America is belied by the fact that at one time, Virginia was the most populous and wealthiest state in the Union, but within a couple of generations, it had fallen behind states in the North because the South depended upon slavery, which impoverished the South relative to the North, which is primarily why the North won the election.
Now, if you noticed, he was very vague on that statement. That's why the North won the election. Or whatever he was saying, and everything was important. I don't know what period he was talking about because he was very vague about it. But I'm assuming the election he's talking about was Abraham Lincoln. And if he is talking about that, then there was several documentaries done on that. I read several books, several documentaries, and I think it's going to be easier for me to show you the documentaries. So this is one that I found. Mississippi's War, Slavery and Succession. Let's see what these experts have to say about that.
It's important to recognize the sheer wealth that the South economy had. By 1860, the South, not the United States, but the South had the fourth largest economy in the world. And that was largely due to its production of cotton.
Cotton in 1860 was the nation's most valuable export item. More valuable than steel, more valuable than manufactured goods. Cotton was the one thing that Americans made that the rest of the world wanted. And Mississippi was the nation's leading cotton producer. So it was a wealthy, wealthy state.
It is literally a gold mine.
A plantation well stocked with hands is a ne plus ultra of every man's ambition who resides in the South. Young men who come to this country to make money soon catch the mania, and nothing less than a broad plantation waving with snow-white cotton balls can fill their mental vision. Mississippi author Joseph Holt Ingram.
People were addicted to cotton. Cotton was the crop that would bring you great wealth.
Particularly in the state of Mississippi, you have a state that enters the Union in the 19th century, in 1817. And by the start of the Civil War, it's the richest one in the country, in the entire Union. There are more millionaires per region than any other place in the United States. So Mississippi is a place where people know you can get land for cheap, but you can also participate in a market that allows your wealth to grow.
No one could have had, or very few people could have had a life harder than my father. My father was 13 years old, born in 1915. He was kicked out of his house by his mother. Athens, Georgia, Jim Crow, at the beginning of the Great Depression. The man walked down the street, did whatever he could. Ultimately, he became a Pullman porter on the trains, which was the largest private employer of blacks in those days. traveled all over the world, became a Marine, was one of the first black Marines, a Montford Court Marine, and my dad always told my brothers and me the following.
Any fucking harder at all, you'd be out fucking stealing for a living.
Yes, yes, yes. We all had a hard life. We can all line up and tell all the hardships we've seen. Even rich people got hard lives. It's different when your actual government is playing cards against you to make your own life, particularly your life, hard on purpose.
And now, through the use of a National Housing Act insured mortgage, is brought within the reach of all citizens on a monthly payment.
In the midst of the New Deal, when the FDR administration is looking for ways to try to stabilize the housing market, the Fair Housing Act is passed in 1934. And as part of that, the Homeowners Loan Corporation is also established with the hope that if you could establish long-term mortgages with fixed interest rates, you could create pathways to homeownership for most Americans.
This time they can buy this house with monthly payments that are less than they now spend for rent.
When the FHA starts underwriting mortgages in the 1930s, this really is a game changer in a lot of ways. It takes a lot of risk off the banks, it places it onto the federal government, and now working class, middle class families, they're able to purchase a home.
Unfortunately, as part of that, what the HOLC does is it establishes designations for neighborhoods based on the occupants of those neighborhoods.
And this is where the term redlining comes into place. The FHA, they made color-coded maps of all the largest cities in the United States, and they broke cities down into 4 different areas. Red is considered hazardous, that's the worst. Yellow is considered definitely declining. Blue is considered still desirable, and green is considered the best. So areas that were predominantly African American or majority minority, or really in a lot of cases, even if there's a few non-white people there, that's often enough to be redlined. So when they built these maps, they also explained why each area got the ranking it did. The FHA refused to give an area a green line designation. Again, this is the best designation that they'll offer unless, and I'm quoting again, restrictive covenants are already in place. That line's from the FHA underwriting manual. Racial covenants aren't just about discriminating against people of color. It's about enriching white people. And I think that's the part that often gets lost in this narrative. And I think it does speak to the ways that white supremacy have been embedded in really built structures and built environments. I mean, if your grandparents bought a home on Minnehaha Creek, that home's worth, $500,000? If your grandparents rented in an area that was redlined and then subsequently destroyed by a freeway project, you're not inheriting anything.
In a lot of ways, the practice of redlining, which didn't start until the 1930s, institutionalized and spread racial covenants all over the country because suddenly developers got sanction, they got direction from the federal government saying, this is best practices if you want to have a really high rating from us, if you want to get the most favorable terms for any loans.
By kind of de-integrating Minneapolis, which in many ways is what racial covenants are doing, this set the stage and enabled all these subsequent systems of inequality to really take hold.
This very persistent myth that northern cities never had formal segregation. The South had Jim Crow, and look at those signs. Well, racial covenants did the work of Jim Crow in the North, all over the North.
Many
The 1935 land use planning map used to define which place would get mortgages versus others circled these areas, called them slums, places where the quote-unquote Negroes lived. These are places to avoid, right? So they're going to give you substandard housing and they're going to contain you.
Hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. You cannot control the outcome, but you are 100% in control of the effort. And before you complain about what other people did to you, go to the nearest mirror and say to yourself, what could I have done to change the outcome?
Now that's ironic. That statement was rich.
It's all right, little brother. There are more.
Now let's talk about the Federal Housing Administration. The FHA created low-interest mortgages to build homes across the country. This agency actually built the suburbs as we know it. They basically said, hey, banks, if someone applies for a mortgage, go ahead, build them a house. Even if they don't pay you back, we'll still guarantee a loan. unless they're black. The FHA's manual literally prohibited the occupancy of properties except by the race for which they are intended.
We get most of our school funding through local property tax. That meant that black cities cannot produce as much money as white suburbs, which can tax at a very low rate on high property tax. And so you see vast disparities between how suburban schools that serve lots of white kids are funded and urban schools that serve lots of black and Latino kids are funded. And that all goes back to the legacy of redlining.
Wow. Did the Fair Housing Act help at all?
Once redlining and discrimination in lending and housing became illegal in 1968, we didn't rejigger all of the property values that had been directly related to redlining, which put a premium on white communities and put a much lower property value rate on black communities. It's not like we started from scratch and equalized all of these property values. We just continue to watch white communities accumulate more and more wealth and black communities be deprived. And of course, that's going to impact how schools can be funded.
Are there any places where we can really see the effects of redlining on education?
One place where you can really see this play out, probably in the most oppressive way, would be the city of Detroit, home to the most unequal school funding border in the country. And that's the border between Grosse Pointe, which is very, very wealthy and almost entirely white, which borders right on Detroit. The schools in Detroit are falling apart, and the schools in Grosse Pointe, one of them has marble floors.
Thanks, Nicole.
That was a lot.
The cycle doesn't end there. Redlining, education, and criminal justice are all related. Let me take you on a trip to one of my favorite cities, Baltimore. Here is the original 1937 redlining map of Baltimore. Even though blacks and whites use illegal drugs at about the same rates, black people are 3 times more likely to be arrested. And where do you think they go to fight this war on drugs?
I've seen The Wire. They go to the hood.
See the red areas on the map? That's the forbidden neighborhoods, remember? Now let's look at this data of marijuana arrests between January 2013 and October 2014. Here are the heroin arrests and the crack arrests. Drug arrests and poverty are almost exclusively contained in the redlined areas. Isn't that remarkable?
You pronounced racist wrong.
And getting out of jail ain't any easier. In Maryland, 13 of the 15 zip codes with the highest bills are in Baltimore's redlined neighborhoods.
Damn.
Yeah, so basically, redlining created poor neighborhoods, which led to underfunded schools, more poverty, and more black people in prison.
Let me guess. And the cycle continues?
Like a dog chasing its tail.
And my dad always told us this: no matter how hard you work, no matter how good you are, sooner or later bad things will happen to you. How you respond to those bad things will tell your mother and me if we raised a man.
Man, you come right out of a comic book.
Another federal program that was perhaps even more powerful in creating racial segregation, and that was a program of the Federal Housing Administration designed to move white families out of urban areas into single-family homes in the suburbs. At a racially explicit basis, we created a white noose around every urban area with federally subsidized single-family home subdivisions. These were giant subdivisions in many cases. The most famous of them, I'm sure you've heard of it, is Levittown, east of New York City. 17,000 homes in one place. What bank would be crazy enough to lend a developer the money to build 17,000 homes or 15,000 homes in one place for which he had no buyers? We were in a suburban country at that time. People thought the whole idea was lunacy. Who's going to want to live in a single family home when they can live in the city instead? Any of these developers, the only way they could get the capital to build these giant subdivisions was by going to the Federal Housing Administration, submitting their plans for the development, for approval of the construction materials they were going to use, the architectural design, the layout of the streets in the subdivision, and an explicit commitment not to sell a home to an African American, required by the Federal Housing Administration. The Federal Housing Administration even required, as a condition of these guarantees, developers like Levitt to place a clause in the deed of every home prohibiting resale to African Americans or rental to African Americans. These deeds still exist in these homes today. They're no longer enforced, no longer enforceable, but they're still there. What was the consequence of this? Well, those homes in those days, in all of these suburbs, they sold for $10,000 or less, $8,000, $9,000 a piece. In today's money, that's less than $100,000, probably $90,000. African Americans who were prohibited prohibited. Not they didn't want to, not because they didn't like living among whites. They were prohibited from moving into these suburbs, and they could easily afford to do so. Any working class family can afford to buy a home for $90,000, roughly twice national median income. Those homes and developments like that now sell for $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 and more. The white families of the next couple of generations gained, you can do the arithmetic, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in equity. They used that equity to send their children to college, to take care of medical emergencies, to take care of economic downturns, most importantly, to bequeath it to their children, who then had down payments for their own homes. African Americans who accumulated none of that wealth as a result of this federal subsidy had none of those abilities. Today, nationwide, African American incomes are on average about 60% of white incomes. African American wealth today is 10% of white wealth. That enormous disparity between a 60% income ratio and a 10% wealth ratio is entirely attributable to unconstitutional federal housing policy practiced in the mid-20th century that has never been remedied. It's a constitutional violation. Of course, it determines the ongoing racial inequalities we have today.
And my father always said this about the Democrat Party. They want to give you something for nothing. And when you're trying to get something for nothing, you almost always end up getting nothing for something.
Damn! That's cold.
And I had a couple of follow-ups. Mr. Elder, I have a question. Last year, prior to the pandemic, the strength of the U.S. economy helped all Americans, most notably minority Americans. In fact, in CNBC in 2019 said African American unemployment hit the lowest ever in the history of our country, from a peak in 2010 of 16.6%. First of all, how did that happen? And is that in your understanding correct? Those particular numbers.
Well, that's right. It happened because taxes got lowered, regulations got eased, and the economy took off. And when the economy takes off, those who are unskilled disproportionately improve, just as happened during the Reagan administration. During the Reagan administration, Black adult unemployment fell faster than did white adult unemployment. Hispanic adult unemployment fell faster than white unemployment fell. Black teen unemployment fell faster than white teen unemployment. Good economic policies work. Equal rights and equal results are two very different things, and that's what I think we're getting confused about here. Everybody's entitled to equal rights, but nobody's entitled to equal results.
I remember black people were promised 40 acres and a mule. We didn't get a dime. We didn't get a nickel. We didn't even get a half a mule. We didn't even get a mule to share amongst us, okay? 1 acre of land and a mule to share amongst all of us. We didn't even get that. Somehow, white people got theirs, though. They got free land from the government. And as it's all was depicted in a movie, Far Away, produced and directed by Ron Howard. Let's check it out.
And Benjamin Harrison signed the Indian Appropriations Bill, which opened nearly 2 million acres of unassigned land to white settlement in the center of Indian Territory. For those interested, 160 acres of land was free for those who staked a claim. Participants had to be at least 21 years old and an American citizen. Their only cost was a $14 filing fee. Owners of the land would be determined in an unconventional way, called a land run.
one of the witnesses, I believe it was Mr. Shelton, referred to Africans as being torn out of their country. Well, according to Harvard's Henry Louis Gates, that's not how it happened at all. 90% of Africans were sold by African chieftains who conquered them in tribes, sold European slavers and to Arab slavers. And speaking of Arab slavers, the Arab slave trade took place centuries before the European slave trade did and lasted longer, and the death rate was much, much higher. So as we talk about who pays who, this is going to be one of the greatest generational transfers of wealth back and forth because virtually every people on the face of the earth was involved in slavery. Europeans enslaved Europeans, Africans enslaved Africans, as mentioned. Native Americans even enslaved Native Americans, Asians enslaved Asians. In fact, white Muslim slavers took more whites out of the Mediterranean than European slavers took blacks out of Africa to North America. So figuring out who owes what is going to be a hell of an achievement.
Now, that's what you call deflection. We're not talking about slavery all over the world. Yes, of course, it happened all over the world. Actually, in the Sudan, there's still slavery. Okay, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about the United States of America, 2021. That blacks still have not received any reparations, no apologies, no give me's, no nothing, and we're still getting a hard way to go. That's what we're talking about. When people start paying something, then they'll start saying, well, wait a minute, let's be fair, let's be right, let's do this, let's do that. But until then, if I can get it for free, I'm going to keep getting it for free. That's just obvious.
Now, I've been in radio and TV for some 35 years. And during that time, I have been unsuccessful in getting some of these black leaders on my program. Al Sharpton won't come on. Jesse Jackson won't come on. Farrakhan won't come on.
I'm not the guy that you kill. I'm the guy that you buy. Are you so fucking blind you don't even see what I am?
So there's two types of revolutionaries. There's the kind you kill and the kind you buy. Malcolm X, the kind you kill.
Because of our effort toward getting straight to the root, that people oftentimes think we're dealing in hate. We are oppressed. We are exploited. We are downtrodden. We are denied not only civil rights, but even human rights. So the only way we're going to get some of this oppression and exploitation away from us or aside from us is come together against the common enemy.
Huey P. Newton, the kind you kill.
The power is with the people. So the real question is that what are the people going to do? I said we're going to unite and become very strong, and we're going to free all political prisoners and prisoners of war. We'll free the Soledad Brothers 3, that's Cloutier, Drumgo, Fleeter, Drumgo, and George Jackson. And all of the other brothers there at Soledad and white prisoners also have a case because the prisons are not rehabilitation centers. They are no more than concentration camps.
Martin Luther King, the kind you kill.
50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation.
The kind you buy. Al Sharpton, the kind you buy.
Well, what if, say, some big celebrity were to come charging through the door?
Sorry I'm late, Judge. I'll make this quick.
And son.
Who the hell are you? The image of Santa Claus has been crafted for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. But we're supposed to be in a different day. Give the world a black Santa Claus. Let the people have an African American come down the chimney bearing joy and goodwill. Gay, not black. The prejudice against gay people must stop. We all say we're for gay rights.
Gentlemen like yourself, the kind you buy.
And one of the leaders I was able to get on was Kawese Mfume, who's now back in Congress. He was then the president of the NAACP, having left Congress. And I said, Mr. Mfume, as between the presence of white racism or the absence of black fathers, Which poses the bigger threat to the Black community? Without missing a beat, he said the absence of Black fathers.
That's one of those questions set up to get the exact answer that you want. Okay? Which will kill you worse? The gun or my finger that pulls the trigger of the gun? Duh. That makes no sense. You set the question up just so that you can get the answer you wanted. Of course, Black fathers are a threat and hurting the Black community more. Only because who drives that? The white establishment, the government. The government does this. This is a government saying. The government has been humping Black people asses since we've been in this country. Now they got things to divide Black men and Black women. The government created this whole situation.
In 1915, 18% of blacks were born outside of wedlock. That number now is almost 70%. I think most of us would agree that there was greater racism in 1950 than right now. We're not having a discussion about whether or not the welfare state has incentivized women to marry the government and incentivized men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. And it was Barack Obama who said, a kid raised without a father is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, 20 times more likely to end up in jail. Why are we having a discussion about the absence of Black fathers and all of the unintended consequences that flow through that?
Okay, and now, here's the $1 million question. If Barack Obama knew all of this, but he didn't lift a finger to do anything about it, but he knew it, but he didn't lift a finger to do anything about it. To come to think about it, what did Barack Obama do for the Black community? Nothing. The same thing Biden is going to do. Nothing. They say it while they're campaigning. I don't understand how people still going for the same thing. After Barack Obama didn't do nothing, I know I ain't waiting for the white man to do nothing. I am giving a shout out to Ice Cube. Good job, bro. Whatever comes of it, I can care less. The point is that you put it out there. The point is that you did it. You did the damn thing. You did that. All right? I respect that. You get a lot of respect from me.
Congressman Owens mentioned the high schools in Baltimore where 0% can do math at grade level. Actually, it's 13 public high schools in Baltimore where 0% of kids can do math at grade level, and another half a dozen where only 1% can.
Okay, so whose fault is that? The students or the teachers? The teachers are constantly screaming and demanding more money, but yet they're failing the children. The same teachers who are failing these children, their children don't go to those schools. Their children do not go to those schools. Their children go to private schools or much better schools, but the schools have not been desegregated. Okay, they go to their schools, we go to our schools. They're constantly teaching the children to be improficient. Why? 15 years from now, in the future, their children will have the edge over the Black and Hispanic children. That's the plan the whole time. They would never send those kids there because they would never send their children there because they know that they're not teaching them anything on purpose. When both sides go to the workforce at the ages 17, 18, 19, and 20, one side will be ill-equipped. The teachers' unions are not necessarily Democrats, but they teach your children to be Democrats because they're being paid by the Democrats to indoctrinate your children to be Democrats. It's kind of like when you grew up loving McDonald's. Now as an adult, you love McDonald's. Right? When you was a child, you loved going to McDonald's. Now you take your children to McDonald's. Well, it's the same science that McDonald's use to target the children. So does the Democrats use to target their children and make sure they're indoctrinated and grow up Democrat. This way, they don't have to do anything. All they have to do is pay off the teachers union, which Biden gave the teachers unions $129 billion on top of the $30 billion that they still haven't spent yet. Does that not sound like a payoff? Now, $130 billion for nothing. You just said they fail in his children. So if they fail in the children, what are you giving them all that money for? If you're not opening up the schools, why did they receive all that money just not to open up the schools? Because it's a payoff for indoctrinating black and brown children to grow up Democrat. Not rocket science. Very simple.
He says he doesn't want to pay 62% in taxes, which, by the way, isn't a plan of Joe Biden's. That's a lie. So he doesn't want to pay 62% of taxes because he doesn't want to go from being 50 cents to 20 cents. And I had to remind him that he was a black person, so he can't vote for Donald Trump, and that he shouldn't be influencing an entire swath of people who may listen to him because he's worried about his own personal pocketbook.
That is why if you ask a black or brown child or adult, why are they Democrat? What did the Democrats do for you? They'll get an attitude because they don't really know why. Because they've been indoctrinated. They've been fed this since a child. And they think this is the order of things. You're black, you're supposed to be Democrat. There's no rhyme or reason to it. And they don't need it. This is what I've always been told. Just like you eat soup with a spoon and you eat steak with a knife and fork. There may not be no rhyme and reason, but this is the order of things, so therefore this is what I do. All schools, including and especially colleges and universities, are indoctrination centers. It's no saying, and it's a simple one. He who controls the diameter of your knowledge knows the circumference of your actions.
Now, Baltimore is a city where in 2015, Freddie Gray died in police custody, as you know. The mayor was black. Number 1 and number 2 running the police department, black. City council, all Democrat, majority black. 3 of the 6 cops who were charged, black.
The gentleman has expired. I'll allow the witness to complete his answer.
Okay. Thank you. The judge before whom 2 of the officers tried the case was black. The state attorney who blocked the charges against the officers was black. The U.S. attorney was black. And the president of the United States is black. And we're talking about systemic institutional racism. To me, it's crazy.
Now, for a man as smart as you, not to know that even in slavery times, you had house niggas. And what happened with house niggas? They get promoted to higher and higher status. They run around telling slaves what to do. They going around beating the slaves. They going around snitching on the slaves. They start to act like massa. They start to rape the slaves and do what the hell they want. They start to feel just like massa. And they mimic massa. Kind of like a boy mimicking his father. So don't say you talk about racism. That's crazy. Because this is what racism produces. A racist master boy will act just like massa. It's not rocket science. It's really not.
Oh, I had more to say.
Congressman, thank you so much. I agree with, of course, everything you said. And Congressman Cohen did completely butcher the 3/5 argument, and thank you for correcting the record. He also referred to a civil rights warrior named Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin was an acolyte of Martin Luther King, and Bayard Rustin was both black and gay and did not support race-based preferences. The Urban League at the time was run by Whitney Young. Whitney Young supported a 10-year period of time where he argued for a Marshall Plan for Black people. Again, 10-year period of time. This was 1965, so it would have long since been over had the board approved it, but they didn't. One board member said, "Are you crazy? Here we are telling America to be fair, and you're telling, quote, you're telling Americans to, quote, hire Negroes just because they're Negroes, close quote. We oppose it." So this is completely divisive. And I want to quote somebody who once was asked about reparations, and he said this, and I'm quoting, "It is easy to make that theoretical argument, but as a practical matter, it is hard to think of any society in human history in which a majority population has said that as a consequence of historic wrongs, we are now going to take a big chunk of that nation's resources over a long period of time to make that right," end of quote. He said, as a practical matter, it is virtually impossible to do. That gentleman was Barack Obama, and he was right.
When has America ever been fair? America has never been fair, ever. And blacks has always got the shit end of the stick of that. Even when blacks said, "You know what? Enough. We don't need nothing from you. You go your way, and we'll go our way." White people weren't satisfied with that either. Can you say Rosewood? Can you say Black Wall Street? Can you say even Central Park? I mean, there's hundreds of places that blacks established a community for themselves outside of white people, didn't need anything from white people. And you know what white people did? They came and burned it down. Let me give you some examples.
And Tuesday marks a grim anniversary in Florida's political and racial history.
100 years ago, a town was burned to the ground and many Black people killed after some blacks were turned away from the polls. 8 on Your Side's Rod Carter is here now with more on the Ocoee massacre.
Yeah, it's a very interesting story. We actually told a lot of folks about this story during our political special, but right afterwards I got a call from someone who knows about this firsthand. It's something a lot of people in Florida simply do not know about or have never really heard about. Scores of homes burned, people killed, all over exercising the right to vote. One Tampa man knows that story very well. The man at the center of all of it 100 years ago was his great-grandfather.
In my mind, I was definitely thinking this can't be true.
The first time Stephen Nunn heard the story of the Ocoee massacre, it was over a hearty breakfast with his grandmother when he was a teenager.
Then all of a sudden she said, "You know what?" She said, "I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm going to share it with you. But I'm sharing it with great reservation and hesitation because I vowed I'd never talk about it again."
When she was done, he was sort of in shock. During the 1920 presidential election, a group of Black Floridians went to the polls. Some were turned away, which led to a night of violence now known as the Ocoee Massacre. At the center of it, a man named July Perry. On November 2nd, 1920, Perry's friend Moses Norman, a black man, went to vote and was turned away. Both Perry and Norman had encouraged other blacks and women to vote in the 1920 presidential election, with Republican Warren G. Harding up against Democrat James Cox. That night, Perry was hanged, his wife and daughter brought to jail here in Hillsborough County. That daughter was Coretha, that's Nunn's grandmother.
Never in the history of the U.S. has a massacre such as what took place in Ocoee took place during voting time or over voting.
The story of the Ocoee Massacre on display right now at the Orange County Regional History Center in an exhibit called Yesterday, This Was Home.
At the end of the night, 2 white men have been killed. An unknown number of black people have been murdered. That is a number we will probably never know.
But curator Pam Schwartz says it was about more than just money. It was about the land that blacks owned.
Over several years, there is an ongoing series of land sales. The land was not just sort of snapped up by the white community and the black people fled. The black community did try to fight and keep their land.
Stephen Nunn's great-grandparents lost all of it.
And all of that land, the only way to put it today is it was robbed. They were robbed.
And now he wants this tragic story of his family's loss to serve as a lesson to the nation.
He was a just man. He was a community man. And he had to pay an awesome price over a principle that we still debate today, and some are lackadaisical about it.
And to this day, almost 100 years later, which will be on November 2nd, no one has ever been brought to justice for the Ocoee massacre. This week, by the way, the city of Ocoee is hosting a week-long celebration to honor and remember the Ocoee massacre, and really all of the African Americans who call that home. It will culminate with the unveiling of a historic marker to remember the victims and all of the African Americans who lived there.
You know, and so
I also heard one of the witnesses refer to the belief that white people are superior and their belief that Black people are inferior. Well, they can believe what they want to believe, but the facts are that young Black people have higher self-esteem than do young white people, and much higher self-esteem than do young Asian people. So if the argument is that historical discrimination and Jim Crow has somehow caused Blacks to think of themselves as less than Blacks, it ain't working. Blacks have higher self-esteem than virtually any other race in America.
Oh, I had more to say.
My question, Attorney Elder, do you agree that there are Black folks in America who are stuck at the bottom due to the legacy of racism, slavery, and Jim Crow, and that America should take affirmative action to address employment, healthcare, housing, and educational disparities that plague our people to this day?
Congressman Johnson, thank you very much for the question. Obviously, there are Black people who are poor. The extent to which the poverty is a result of slavery and Jim Crow is tenuous at best.
What did you say, nigger?
People forget Barack Obama is half white. His wife is Black and she's a descendant of slavery. But she got hers. They're rich now. They can care less. And this is their mentality. And of course he's going to say that, but it seemed like nobody had a problem when they were robbing, raping, killing, pillaging, destroying Black communities. In the millions, in the billions, in the trillions of dollars destroyed of Black communities, Black progress. Every time Blacks make progress, the white people, or maybe the United States government, because they were behind all of it, will come and destroy it. Why? Because Blacks were progressing too fast. You leave Blacks alone too long, they will progress. Before you know it, there's a town built. Before you know it, a city is built. So they have to interject and destroy all of that. Let me give you another example.
The Red Summer of 1919, named for the blood that ran through America's cities during months of racial unrest. African American soldiers had returned home from the Great War, World War I, to a country still teeming with discrimination. And in their quest for civil rights, tensions between Blacks and whites reached a tipping point. Deadly race riots broke out in over 24 cities, but one rural town, Elaine, Arkansas, would become the epicenter for the bloodshed. The violence there, lynch mobs, torture, indiscriminate murder, was so horrific it would go down in history not as a race riot, but as the Elaine Massacre. This is history. Although the exact number will never be known, a recent estimate suggests 237 Black men, women, and children were killed. There was an immediate demand for justice, but not for the Black lives lost. 5 white men were also killed in the fighting. Hundreds of African Americans were rounded up and put in jail, and when the jail was full, they detained the rest in a schoolhouse.
While they are detained, there is torture going on.
The goal? To elicit false confessions of a Black uprising.
They whipped the men, whipped them for long periods of time. They stuffed formaldehyde up their noses, and they stripped them naked and shocked them with electrical charges. They did this until they confessed to the conspiracy.
Robert Hill escaped to Kansas, but his peers back in Arkansas were not as lucky. 122 indictments were issued, and trials quickly started.
The men were brought into the court in chains. They weren't allowed to consult with their defense attorney. The defense attorney rarely interjected. And then the all-white juries started delivering guilty verdicts. In one case, the guilty verdicts came back in 2 minutes.
Oh, I had more to say.
I would like to just ask Mr. Elder if he has any comments to say in response to Representative Hank Johnson's question that he had asked earlier. I'd like to continue this conversation about that.
I do. We've been talking about disparate outcomes as if the disparate outcomes by definition mean racism. There was a young attorney named Barack Obama who joined with other attorneys to file a class action lawsuit against Citibank some years ago. And as a result of the class action lawsuit, the Citibank agreed to grant mortgages to 186 people who had applied, turned down, and the applicants argued that they were turned down because they were Black. Well, they got the loans, and virtually nobody was able to keep up with the loans. Many of them went into default, which indicated that the bank was not discriminating against these would-be Black borrowers. Also, studies have found that community Black banks often have a higher turn-down rate for would-be borrowers than the majority banks because they are more thinly capitalized. So just because something has a disparate outcome does not mean that that outcome was a result of racism.
Now, Mr. Elder, I've noticed in this video, you invoke the name of Obama a lot. And I've seen a lot of your videos, and you really don't think too highly of Barack Obama. However, in this video, he was right, he was right, he was right. Was he? Now, I'm not a big Obama fan myself. All right? I think that he betrayed the people. He betrayed the people's trust, and then had a lot of nerve to ask them to vote Democrat again.
And after we have achieved historic turnout in 2008 and 2012, especially in the African American community, I will consider it a personal insult, an insult to my legacy, if this community lets down its guard and fails to activate itself in this election. You want to give me a good send-off? Go vote!
So I 100% agree with you as far as that goes. But as far as housing in America, let me give you an example.
I come to buy this house because I was looking for a place, I was just looking for a house. And I happened to look in this neighborhood and had to look at this house. And my wife liked the house. She liked the house. So we contacted the guy who owned the house and got together with him. And met with him on Pulaski Road. He had an office over there. And gave him the money. And so we then took out a contract. The house was $26,000. The house didn't cost that much at first, The house was less than $36,000.
Do you know how much he paid for the house?
Oh, he paid $9,000 for it.
This was a contract.
Right.
What does that mean?
Sound like a mortgage, but the owner still owns the house.
What was the damage, the kind of damage done by contract buying?
It created the ghetto. It wasn't contract buying that did it, it was contract selling. Back then, we used to think of it solely in terms of the harm that it caused to individual families. In the fact that it required husbands to work 2 and 3 jobs, wives to work, which meant that kids had to be left unsupervised frequently enough, and there wasn't enough money to keep up places or keep up the houses that they bought. White folks were claiming that they were irresponsible in terms of keeping up their places, when the fact of the matter was that it was costing them twice as much to own a home, the same home, as if they were white. And that's because of the fact that they were buying on contract, that the speculators came in, bought at basically market value or slightly below from the outgoing white families, and then turn around 2 or 3 days later and would sell to a Black family on contract at close to twice of what they paid for it. recently I became obsessed with the idea of trying to find out how much was stolen legally from the African American community during the Second Great Migration, which was 1940 to 1970. And on the basis of pretty good research, have come to the conclusion that it was at least a minimum of $500 million. And that is $500 million not adjusted for inflation. If you adjust it for inflation, it'd be well over $3 billion today.
We've also talked a lot about the police officers. A few days ago, as I started to say, a man was in the backyard of his own house. Matched the description of a suspect who was running on foot. Police officer chasing, mistook the homeowner for the suspect, shot and killed him. I doubt that very many people you know about this, and the reason you don't know about it is because the cop who shot the suspect was white. The suspect was white. This took place in Idaho. Therefore, nobody gave a writ. But I assure you, if this had been a black suspect and a white cop, we'd know his name.
Here's the $1 million question. What is his name? You said a white man and a white something and a white cop and a white picket fence and a white, but you didn't say where or what. You said in Idaho or Iowa. Okay, those are big states. Why haven't you released the name? You know the information. Why haven't you released the name? You could have easily released the name to us just now. We can look it up. We can look up the cop. You ain't say that. You just said a white cop and a white man in a backyard. Millions of backyards. All right, we narrowed it down to Idaho or Iowa or one of those. Now we're down to 100,000. That makes, you didn't give no dates, no times, no suspect names, anything. And you're a lawyer. And you know in law, it requires proof. Anybody can make anything up. I can make things up right now. I got $1 million sitting right here. And if anybody wants some, come by and get some. Oh, you don't know where I'm at. You don't know where the $1 million at. You don't see the $1 million. You don't see nothing. Exactly. We can all make up stories. We can all stand in a line and tell a lie.
The fact is, there are more unarmed white people killed every year by the police than unarmed blacks. The media couldn't care less. CNN couldn't care less, giving black people the false impression that the police are mowing down black people just because they are black. Not just black or white. It is true that the police are 2.5 times more likely to kill a black suspect.
You're slick, you're talking fast, and that's great lawyering. But I caught that.
Contradicting yourself!
You said,
the fact is, there are more unarmed white people killed every year by the police than unarmed blacks.
Then you said,
it is true that the police are 2.5 times more likely to kill a black suspect.
Which is it?
It is also true that a young black man is anywhere from 7 to 10 times more likely to be a victim of a homicide, almost always the victim at the hands of another young black man. That's why the cops are there. The idea that there's systemic racism against black people is a lie. And when it came to the election, the defenders of Biden were arguing, where is the widespread evidence of voter fraud? A fair question. Where is the forget about widespread, where is the evidence of police brutality against black people? If anything, the evidence shows the police are more hesitant, more reluctant to pull the trigger on a black suspect than a white suspect. It is a fraud, it is a con that is pushed upon this country, and we need to stop it.
Really?
New information about how a seemingly minor jaywalking stop turned into this, a warning. The video is disturbing. That is the scuffling which proved to be the last moment of Kurt Reinhold's life. The 42-year-old father of two was shot to death by police there in broad daylight. He was unarmed. And he was not suspected of any serious felony or misconduct at all. He was stopped for alleged jaywalking, an infraction in California that carries a $250 ticket and is also rarely enforced to begin with. And to understand this incident and why so many of these incidents in American policing prove controversial, it also helps to see what led up to that scuffle, which is our special report tonight, building on our coverage of this case. Tonight, we can actually show you more of precisely that lead up because the Orange County Sheriff's Department has just released more video. only after pressure, we should note, from the public, from recent protests, from press coverage, and a lawsuit. And now this video evidence sheds more light on the officer's mentality going into the stop. We could hear the officers on dash cam video and other video before they even make contact with Reinhold, and they argue over whether to approach him at all. So now on this tape, newly available, I want you to listen as one officer appears to verbally push back against the other, more aggressive officer, saying the situation, before they even made the stop, the situation is, quote, controlled and doesn't merit stopping Reinhold.
There we go. You just didn't need to control, man. I don't know. It is. What guy just stop in the middle? Don't make case for that, Gabriel. Not just we're not identifying them.
So before there was any stop, before what we showed you just earlier, before any scuffle, you have one officer already concerned this may not be a worthwhile or valid stop. The officer says, don't make case law, which sounds like referencing what could become a questionable precedent. Don't turn this stop into a case about crossing the line or where the line is. But they went ahead and they did pull up to Reinhold. And before even telling him why they are stopping him or if he's technically under arrest yet, you're going to see they start saying if he does not stop, they will, quote, make him stop. Quite the escalation for this alleged jaywalking.
How you doing?
Easy on time here, bro.
You can hear, even with this off-camera partial audio, how quickly this whole thing escalated by the choice of the officers. Already, it doesn't look like a stop that's making the neighborhood much safer. It looks like a stop that's escalating a situation with an unarmed person minding his own business, who then is asking, where did he even jaywalk? And then a concerned witness took cell phone video, which shows more of this from another angle.
What did I say for? Stop touching! Stop touching! Stop touching! I mean, why you stop? Stop touching! Stop touching! Stop touching, bro! What is your problem? Why you touching me? Why you touching me? Why you touching me? For what? Who are you?
As they argue, and the video continues, there appears to be an effort by Reinhold to just get away. Then the officers tackle him, which includes the one officer who initially cautioned against the stop, saying things are under control. As it escalates, moments later, an officer says Reinhold has his gun, and they kill him with 2 shots. I got it. And it was over just like that. Now we have more information about how it ever got to that point. How an officer twice insisted, remember, this was a controlled situation that didn't merit the police getting involved.
Control. There we go. You just didn't need to control, man.
It's controlled, man. And it was until it wasn't.
Tell me about this lie again. It seems like the only one caught in a lie here is you.
And then I had a few concluding remarks.
It's been mentioned a couple times that reparations are owed to blacks for 400 years of slavery. Well, America was founded in 1787 and slavery ended in 1865. So that's substantially less than 400 years.
The first slave ship recorded to reach Africa was in 1562. That was the good ship Jesus. 1819, the first slave ship, the White Lion, was recorded to reach Jamestown. In 1865, the slaves wasn't free because they didn't know they still had 2 years before they knew they were free. After that, we went straight into Jim Crow and into redlining, which exists today.
It's also been mentioned that America has yet to atone for slavery. Well, remember that Lyndon Johnson launched the so-called War on Poverty in 1965. He specifically talked about the need to redress past grievances for Blacks. Since then, we've spent over $22 trillion in payments to fight the so-called War on Poverty.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's go to my Google calculator. $22 trillion divided by 55 years since 1965. That's been 55 years. So $22 trillion divided by 55 is $400 billion. Okay, now there is 44,200,000 Black people in America. So let's start there. As you can see, that comes out to less than $10,000 each. $9,049.77. Now, don't forget, this wasn't just for Black people. It was for poverty. So, with the Spanish population being 5% more than the Black population presently, we got to split that with them and give them 55%. That comes out to $4,072.39 per year. Now, we must not forget about the white population. The white population is 5 times greater than the Black population. So we're going to divide that by 6. That means since 1965, on average, Black people received $678.73 per year to battle poverty. Now, that's a joke. That's a joke if I've ever seen it. If you think I'm lying, do the math yourself. You did the math with me. So, Mr. Elder, please, come better than that.
Also, Mr. Cohen mentioned the wonderful story about Minnie Minoso. I remember Minnie Minoso. He's a great ball player. I'd like to give you a story, too, and conclude with this. I was in law school in 1974. 1975, I'm visiting my aunt who lives in Southfield, Michigan, right outside Detroit. And she and I are talking. The doorbell rings. A gentleman comes who's about 40 years old, a friend of my aunt's. And he came in, he sat down, and my aunt and I were talking. I was talking to my aunt about the classes I was taking, what I intended to do after I got out of law school. I looked up, and this 40-year-old Black man was crying. I thought maybe I said something to offend him. I looked up and I said, "Excuse me, did I say something that bothered you?" He said, No. I just wanted to be a lawyer too. And I had the potential to do it. I didn't take responsibility. I got caught up in too much jackassery and I blew my opportunity.
Okay. Now you notice he made a mention of an irrelevant story of him being a lawyer. That was only to remind you that he's a lawyer. Why? Because we've been indoctrinated to believe lawyers and doctors are smart. So he knows what he's talking about. Listen to him. But the problem is this. Doctors are nothing but professional drug dealers, D-boys. The same ones you see on the corner, selling crack, dope, heroin, reefer, smack, whatever. They're the same thing. They just put on a white coat and look cleaner. And lawyers? A lawyer is a professional liar. He gets paid to lie. Do you notice that a law is called a practice? Why? Because they practice lying in court. It's that simple. Whoever's the better liar wins the case. It's not about justice or right and wrong. Whoever lies the best wins. Have you ever heard the term, a man who represents himself as his own lawyer has a fool for a client? Yes, that is because a lawyer has a license to lie in court. Just like James Bond has a license to kill, a lawyer has a license to lie. If you, as a person without a license to lie, go to court and tell a lie, or is believed to be telling a lie, they have a law called the penalty of perjury. The penalty of perjury is punishable by fine or imprisonment up to 5 years, or both. However, how many lawyers have you ever seen go to jail for the penalty of perjury? Because they have a license to lie. It's that simple. And this is what he's doing. Lying. Doing what he does best. Doing what he went to school for. He learned how to lie, and he's continuing that practice.
I went to school with a lot of young Japanese kids, Korean kids, and Chinese kids. They all had something in common. They busted their butts in homework. You look at a graph of who does homework in America. Blacks are outdone by Hispanics, who are outdone by whites, who are outdone by Asians. There's a reason that Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans, and Korean Americans make more money per capita than do white Americans. They work hard, they don't complain, they take responsibility, and I would urge all of Americans to follow that example.
Now, are these the same black kids with the highest self-esteem ever? They're just happy-go-lucky, they don't do their homework and kill each other all day. I have no idea how to explain that one. They don't make more money per capita because they do their homework. They ain't got the American government humping their ass all day.
A few more things I didn't get a chance to say. Does Obama, whose father is from Kenya, an area of active slave trading back in the day, and his mom's family owned slaves, does Obama get a check or does he cut a check? What about Kamala Harris? Her father admitted that his family owned slaves. Her mother is from India. Does Kamala Harris cut a check or does she get a check? Here's another problem. Only about 5% of white people living today in America have any sort of generational connection to slavery. And I have another question. Why should anybody but Democrats pay anything? After all but a handful of slave owners were Democrats.
Okay, to answer all your questions in a nutshell, Obama, Kamala Harris, the Democrats, none of them pay. The American government should pay. And how should they pay? I think black people reparations, if you are a descendant of slaves, you should not pay any taxes. Reparations done and said. If you are a descendant of slaves, You do not pay anything. It's not up to the individuals. It's up to the American government that benefited from this. And it's not just slavery. It's Jim Crow, redlining, stop and frisk, a total violation of the Fourth Amendment in the Constitution.
They say the NYPD stops and frisks way too many innocent men of color for no good reason.
He was holding me, he was going through your pockets, going up, down.
You want to go to jail?
But for what?
Shut
your
mouth,
kid.
Well, I'm gonna get arrested
Shut
for
your
it.
mouth.
What am I getting arrested for? For being a mud. You know
that's a law, being a mud. He was going through my sweater. Then that's when he told me to keep my hands on my head. So I was like this the whole time.
And everything else that you can throw in there, including the crime bill. Remember that? The 1994 crime bill that targeted black people specifically?
There's a second thing that we all have agreed upon, and that is unless we do something about that cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock.
As between the presence of white racism or the absence of black fathers, which poses the bigger threat to the black community? Without missing a beat, he said the absence of black fathers.
Without parents, without supervision, without any structure, without any conscience developing, because they literally, I yield myself 3 more minutes, because they literally have not been socialized. They literally have not had an opportunity. We should focus on them now, not out of a liberal instinct for love, brother, and humanity, although I think that's a good instinct, but for simple, pragmatic reasons. If we don't, they will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now. And Madam President, we have predators on our streets that society has, in fact, in part because of its neglect, created. Again, it does not mean because we created them that we somehow forgive them or do not take them out of society to protect my family and yours from them. They are beyond the pale, many of those people.
Especially those moments, and especially those moments when this campaign was at its lowest ebb, the African American community stood up again for me. You've always had my back, and I'll have yours.
And there's so much more evidence. But you'll be here for 2 or 3 days if I was to put it all in. So I'll just make more videos. But remember this. The school system, the indoctrination centers, main objective is to teach you to memorize, not to think. Certain schools like Yale and Harvard teaches them to think, to be leaders of the free world. They teach us to memorize, to be sheep of the free world. Thank you.
I am not a victim. The whole idea of reparations is insulting. As I said at the very beginning of the hearing, reparations could properly be described as the extraction of money from people who were never slave owners to be given to people who were never slaves. The whole thing is absolutely ridiculous.
Yes, it would. You know the damage one ignorant Negro can do.
I'm not a victim. It's a statement that plays off of your pride, knowing that black people are proud. They like to get a black man up there and say, or a black woman, and say, I'm not a victim. But tell that to George Floyd, Abdullah Wima, Sean Bell, and countless others, and their families, and the thousands that just died just to be dying. Some of us think because we kissed the white man's ass and we're the white man's boy, we're not victims. We're the white man's pet.
You heard Cuba, right? Pretty soon they're all going to be daywalkers, man. When that happens, I'd rather be a pet than cattle. You got me, B?
I hope you enjoyed this video and it left you well informed. If so, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell notification for more content like this. All the links to the full documentaries are in the description box below. If you want to know more about us, please go to our website at www.jazzyunderground.com.